You'll discover why Chinese emperors required their executioners to train for 20 years before they were allowed to perform the death of 1,000 cuts, a torture so precise that skilled practitioners could keep victims conscious and screaming for 3 full days while removing their flesh, piece by piece. You'll learn about the breaking wheels of medieval Europe, massive wooden devices that could systematically shatter every bone in the human body while keeping victims alive to experience each individual fracture. These weren't crude instruments of vengeance, but precision-engineered machines operated by craftsmen who took pride in their ability to prolong suffering for exactly the right amount of time. I'll reveal the economic systems that grew up around royal executions, entire industries dedicated to manufacturing torture devices, training executioners, and managing the crowds that flocked to witness spectacular deaths. Did you know that in medieval Paris, execution days generated more revenue than religious festivals? That skilled executioners earned more than court physicians and commanded respect equal to master craftsmen. You'll discover the architectural marvels hidden beneath royal palaces, torture chambers carved from solid stone, equipped with drainage systems for blood, ventilation shafts to carry screams away from royal apartments, and acoustic designs that could amplify or muffle sounds depending on whether the king wanted to hear his enemies suffer. But here's what will shock you most. These methods didn't disappear with the fall of ancient kingdoms. The psychological techniques perfected by royal torturers, the systematic breaking of human will, the precise application of pain to extract information, the use of anticipation and uncertainty as weapons. These methods evolved and adapted, influencing interrogation techniques that are still used today in places where international law cannot reach. And if you stay with me until the very end of this dark journey, I'll reveal which of these royal execution methods was so effective, so perfectly designed to break the human spirit, that certain governments still use modified versions in hidden facilities around the world. Techniques that trace their lineage directly back to the torture chambers of ancient kings and queens. Before we descend into this abyss of royal cruelty, if you find these deep explorations of history's darkest secrets both educational and disturbing, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Only 18% of you watching are actually subscribed, and your support helps me bring you content that uncovers truths most people will never hear. Now, settle back, let your breathing slow, and prepare yourself for a journey that will forever change how you understand power, justice, and the price of crossing those who wear crowns. Close your eyes and let me transport you to a world where human suffering was elevated to an art form, where the screams of the dying provided entertainment for the most cultured societies in human history. Our first stop takes us to the Forbidden City in Beijing, where behind walls designed to keep secrets, Chinese emperors perfected what they called the gentle death, a punishment so refined in its cruelty that it could stretch the dying process across multiple sunrises while extracting every possible moment of consciousness from the failing human body. To understand the true horror of royal executions, we must first explore the physical spaces where they occurred. These weren't crude dungeons or simple execution grounds, but sophisticated architectural complexes designed by master builders who understood both engineering and psychology. Deep beneath the palaces of ancient kings lay networks of chambers that represented the pinnacle of torture technology. These underground complexes were marvels of engineering that could control temperature, lighting, acoustics, and even airflow to maximize the suffering of victims while protecting the sensibilities of royal audiences. Consider the execution chambers discovered beneath the ruins of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Archaeologists have uncovered a complex of interconnected rooms carved directly from bedrock, each designed for specific types of torture and execution. The main chamber features a domed ceiling with precise acoustic properties. Whispers from the center of the room can be heard clearly throughout the space, while screams are amplified and focused toward a raised platform where Persian nobles would sit to observe proceedings. The chamber floors slope gently towards central drains carved with intricate Persian motifs, allowing blood and other fluids to flow away while maintaining the artistic beauty of the space. Bronze braziers positioned around the room could heat the air to unbearable temperatures or be extinguished to create bone-chilling cold, giving executioners another tool to torment their victims. Water channels built into the walls could flood selected areas of the chamber, allowing for specialized drowning tortures or creating reflecting pools that forced victims to watch their own suffering in the rippling water. The Persian engineers who designed these chambers understood that psychological torture could be as effective as physical pain. European royal torture chambers evolved different architectural solutions suited to their climate and culture. The dungeons beneath the Tower of London represent the English approach to systematic torture, a series of chambers connected by narrow corridors that create a sense of endless maze-like horror for prisoners being led to their fate. The most infamous of these chambers, known as the White Tower's basement, features walls lined with iron rings and chains capable of securing victims in dozens of different positions. The stone walls are covered with centuries of scratches, carvings, and stains that tell the story of thousands of people who died in unimaginable agony. English royal architects developed innovative methods for controlling the experience of both victims and observers. Hidden galleries allowed kings and nobles to watch executions without being seen, maintaining the psychological distance necessary for them to enjoy the spectacle without confronting their own complicity. The Chinese imperial torture complexes beneath the Forbidden City represent perhaps the most sophisticated approach to architectural cruelty ever devised. These chambers were designed according to feng shui principles, but perverted to create spaces that would drain the life force from victims while amplifying their suffering. The main execution hall features a raised platform surrounded by terrace seating for court officials, with the emperor's viewing box positioned to provide the optimal view of proceedings. The platform itself incorporates drainage systems so sophisticated that they could channel different types of fluids, blood, water, oil, to different collection points, allowing executioners to manage multiple torture methods simultaneously. Lighting systems using mirrors and oil lamps could focus intense heat and light on specific areas of the platform, creating spotlight effects that enhance the theatrical nature of executions while providing additional tools for torture. The Chinese understood that controlling what people could see was as important as controlling what they experienced physically. The ventilation systems in these chambers deserve special attention as they represent some of the most advanced engineering of the ancient world. Chinese architects developed methods for controlling airflow that could concentrate smoke, incense, or other airborne substances in specific areas of the chamber. This allowed them to suffocate victims gradually, expose them to mind-altering drugs, or simply enhance the sensory experience for observers. Some chambers featured false walls and hidden passages that allowed executioners to appear and disappear seemingly at random, adding elements of supernatural terror to already horrific proceedings. Victims never knew when or from where the next source of pain might emerge, keeping them in a constant state of anticipation that was itself a form of torture. The economic implications of these architectural complexes were staggering. Royal treasuries spent fortunes equivalent to building entire cities on torture facilities that might be used only a few times per year. The Persian Empire's torture chambers required teams of specialized craftsmen, stone carvers, metalworkers, hydraulic engineers, and acoustic specialists, working for years to create spaces dedicated solely to human suffering. These chambers also required extensive support staff to maintain and operate. Chinese imperial records describe torture complexes that employed hundreds of people, executioners, guards, cleaners, maintenance workers, and specialists in various torture techniques. Entire administrative bureaucracies grew up around the management of royal torture, complete with training programs, quality standards, and performance metrics. The psychological impact of these chambers extended far beyond their immediate victims. The knowledge that such places existed, hidden beneath the palaces where kings held court and made laws, created a climate of fear that influenced behavior throughout society. People knew that somewhere beneath the marble floors and silk hangings lay spaces designed for unimaginable suffering. Modern architects and psychologists who have studied these ancient torture chambers have identified design principles that were deliberately intended to break human spirit before physical torture even began. The combination of confined spaces, unusual acoustics, disorienting lighting, and oppressive atmosphere created environments that could drive people insane through purely psychological means. The chambers were also designed to dehumanize both victims and executioners. By creating spaces that looked more like theaters or temples than prisons, royal architects made it easier for people to think of torture as entertainment or religious ritual rather than as acts of cruelty against fellow human beings. In the imperial courts of China, execution was never merely about ending life. It was about achieving perfect harmony through the systematic application of pain. The method known as Ling Qi, literally meaning slow slicing or death by 1,000 cuts, represented the absolute pinnacle of Chinese judicial philosophy applied to human suffering. Ling Qi wasn't simply torture followed by execution. It was a carefully choreographed ceremony that could last for days, during which skilled executioners would systematically deconstruct a human being while keeping them conscious and aware throughout the entire process. The method was reserved for the most serious crimes against the imperial order, treason, patricide, and offenses against the cosmic harmony that the emperor represented on Earth. The Chinese understanding of Ling Qi went far beyond mere punishment to encompass concepts of spiritual purification and cosmic justice. According to Confucian philosophy, the human body was a sacred gift from one's ancestors, and to mutilate it was to dishonor one's entire lineage. By systematically destroying the condemned person's body, Ling Qi didn't just end their life. It erased their spiritual connection to family and ancestry, condemning them to wander as hungry ghosts for eternity. Wang's execution lasted nearly 4 hours, during which approximately 1,200 individual cuts were made to his body. Witnesses described how he remained alert and aware almost until the end, his eyes following Chen's movements, his mouth occasionally forming words that no one could hear over the sound of the crowd. The final cuts were made to his heart and major arteries, allowing death to finally claim him as the last pieces of his flesh were removed. The disposal of Wang's remains was as carefully choreographed as his execution. The pieces of flesh removed during the Ling Qi were often fed to dogs or thrown into rivers, ensuring that no proper burial could take place. This spiritual mutilation was considered worse than physical death, as it condemned the victim to wander as a hungry ghost for eternity. The case of Lai Hongjiang, the traitor's son, 1901, perhaps no Ling Qi execution better demonstrates the political dimensions of this punishment than the case of Li Hongjiang, son of a high-ranking military officer who was convicted of selling state secrets to foreign powers during the Boxer Rebellion. His execution in 1901 occurred during the final years of the Qing dynasty, when China was struggling to maintain its independence against European colonial powers. Lai's case was particularly significant because his father had been a loyal servant of the empire for decades, holding positions of great trust and responsibility. The discovery of his son's treason was seen not just as a personal betrayal, but as evidence of the corruption that was weakening China from within. The Empress Dowager Cixi personally ordered that Lai be executed by Ling Qi, and that the process be conducted with maximum severity to demonstrate that no family connections could protect traitors from imperial justice. The executioner chosen for Lai's case was Master Zhang Benrui, considered the most skilled practitioner of Ling Qi in the empire. Zhang had performed over 200 executions during his career, developing innovations that pushed the boundaries of how long a human could survive the cutting process. His technique was so refined that he could keep victims conscious for up to 6 hours, while removing the majority of their flesh. Lai's preparation for execution included psychological techniques designed to maximize his terror and despair. He was forced to write detailed confessions of his crimes, including descriptions of how his actions had harmed innocent Chinese people. These confessions were read aloud to him daily, forcing him to confront the consequences of his betrayal while anticipating his approaching torture. The execution took place during the Chinese New Year celebrations, when the contrast between the joy of the festival and the horror of the lynching would have maximum psychological impact on spectators. The timing was carefully chosen to demonstrate that imperial justice transcended seasonal celebrations and personal emotions. Zhang's technique incorporated several innovations that made Li's execution particularly horrific. He used a combination of shallow and deep cuts that created a pattern across the victim's body, removing flesh and geometric designs that had symbolic meaning related to Li's specific crimes. Areas of the body associated with betrayal, the hands that had written treasonous letters, the mouth that had spoken secrets, received special attention during the cutting process. The psychological torture was enhanced by forcing Li to watch, as other prisoners were executed by conventional methods before his turn came. He witnessed beheadings and strangulations that would have seemed merciful compared to his approaching fate, building his terror to unbearable levels before Zhang even touched him with a knife. Li's execution lasted over 5 hours, with Zhang demonstrating his skill by keeping the victim conscious and responsive almost until the end. The crowd that gathered to watch included foreign diplomats who documented the proceedings in reports sent back to their governments, spreading knowledge of Chinese execution methods throughout the world. The science of systematic suffering, what made lynching uniquely horrifying, wasn't just its duration or the number of cuts involved, but the scientific precision with which it was applied. Chinese executioners were trained professionals who studied human anatomy with the dedication of physicians, learning exactly how the human body could be systematically dismantled while preserving consciousness and maximizing pain. The training process for lynching executioners lasted many years and involved both theoretical study and practical experience. Apprentice executioners studied medical texts that described human anatomy in detail, learning the location of major organs, blood vessels, and nerve clusters. They practiced their cutting techniques on cadavers and eventually on condemned criminals under the supervision of master executioners. The psychological preparation of executioners was as important as their technical training. They studied Buddhist and Confucian philosophy to understand the spiritual dimensions of their work, learning to view themselves not as murderers but as instruments of cosmic justice. This philosophical framework allowed them to perform their duties without being overwhelmed by guilt or emotional distress. Different schools of lynching execution developed different techniques and specializations. Some focused on maximizing the duration of the execution, while others emphasized the precision of their cuts or the artistic patterns they could create on the victim's body. Competition between executioners led to constant innovation and refinement of techniques. The tools used for lynching were works of art in themselves, crafted by master smiths who understood the specific requirements of execution work. Knives were forged from special steel alloys that could hold impossibly sharp edges while remaining flexible enough to make precise cuts through flesh and muscle. Different blade shapes were designed for different types of cuts. Thin, narrow blades for shallow incisions, broader blades for removing larger pieces of flesh, and specialized tools for accessing difficult areas of the body. The economic aspects of lynching execution were substantial, involving entire industries dedicated to manufacturing execution tools, training executioners, and managing the crowds that flocked to witness these spectacles. Skilled executioners commanded high salaries and social status equivalent to master craftsmen, reflecting the specialized knowledge and training required for their profession. Medical experts who have studied historical accounts of lynching have identified specific techniques that could prolong consciousness and maximize pain while avoiding immediate death. The systematic removal of flesh from extremities inward, the careful avoidance of major arteries and organs, and the use of pressure points and nerve stimulation all demonstrate sophisticated understanding of human physiology. The psychological impact of lynching extended far beyond the execution ground, influencing Chinese culture and society for centuries. The mere threat of this punishment was often enough to deter serious crimes, while detailed accounts of executions served as cautionary tales that reinforced social order and imperial authority. regional variations and cultural adaptations. While Lingqi originated in Chinese imperial courts, variations of the technique spread throughout East Asia, with each culture adapting the basic principles to their own judicial philosophies and social structures. Korean courts developed their own version called Cheongjang, which incorporated elements of Confucian ritual that emphasized the restoration of social harmony through suffering. The case of Jean Callis, religious justice in Toulouse, 1762, perhaps no breaking wheel execution is better documented than that of Jean Callis, a Protestant merchant from Toulouse who was convicted of murdering his son to prevent him from converting to Catholicism. Callis's case would later inspire Voltaire's famous campaign against judicial torture, but at the time of his execution, he was simply another victim of a system that treated human suffering as public entertainment. Callis was brought to the execution ground in the center of Toulouse on March 10, 1762, where thousands had gathered to witness what they expected would be a spectacular display of divine justice against a Protestant heretic. The execution ground itself was a permanent installation, with a massive stone platform that elevated the proceedings above the surrounding crowd. The wheel used for Callis's execution was a masterpiece of French craftsmanship, constructed from oak timber and reinforced with iron bands that could support the weight of both victim and executioner. The executioner assigned to Callis's case was Charles Henry Sanson, a member of the most famous executioner family in French history. The Sanson family had served as royal executioners for over 2 centuries, passing down their techniques and expertise from father to son. Charles Henry had inherited not just his position, but also a vast knowledge of human anatomy and the mechanical principles necessary to operate the breaking wheel with maximum effectiveness. The preparation for Callis's execution began several hours before dawn, when he was removed from his cell in the Toulouse prison and subjected to the preparatory torture known as the question. This involved stretching his limbs on a rack, while interrogators demanded that he confess additional crimes or implicate accomplices. The question served both legal and practical purposes. It was supposed to extract final confessions, while also weakening the condemned person's body before the main execution. Callis maintained his innocence throughout the question, even as his joints were dislocated and his muscles torn. His refusal to confess was seen by authorities as additional evidence of his heretical nature, justifying the severity of his approaching execution. By the time he was brought to the wheel, his body was already damaged and weakened, ensuring that his suffering would be even more intense. The wheel itself was positioned at the center of the platform, surrounded by wooden barriers that kept spectators at a safe distance while ensuring they had clear views of the proceedings. Sanson's assistants bound Callis to the wheel with heavy ropes, positioning his arms and legs so that his major bones lay directly over gaps between the spokes. This positioning was crucial to the wheel's effectiveness. Bones that were properly aligned would break cleanly when struck, while poor positioning might result in crushing injuries that would end the spectacle too quickly. The crowd that gathered to watch Callis's execution represented a cross-section of Toulouse society. Catholic nobles occupied raised platforms that provided premium viewing angles, while merchants and craftsmen filled the standing areas closer to the execution platform. Even peasants from surrounding villages had traveled to the city to witness what they saw as divine justice against a Protestant heretic. Sanson began the breaking process with Callis's legs, raising his iron bar high above his head before bringing it down with calculated force across the victim's shin. The sound of breaking bone echoed across the square, followed immediately by screams that witnesses described as inhuman. But Sanson's skill lay not in the force of his blows, but in their precision. Each strike was calculated to shatter bone without causing immediate death from shock or blood loss. The executioner worked his way up Callis's body systematically, breaking first the shins, then the thighs, then the arms, and finally the ribs and shoulders. Between each blow, he would pause, allowing the victim to fully experience the pain of each new injury and giving the crowd time to react to each stage of the performance. Callis remained conscious throughout most of the process, his screams growing weaker as shock began to set in but never stopping entirely. After all the major bones had been broken, Callus's shattered limbs were woven through the spokes of the wheel, creating a grotesque human sculpture that demonstrated the executioner's skill in systematically dismantling the human body. The wheel was then hoisted high above the square, where Callus would be left to die slowly from shock, internal bleeding, and exposure. The elevation of the wheel served multiple purposes beyond simple display. The height ensured that Callus's suffering would be visible from a great distance, while also preventing any possibility of rescue or mercy. The victim's broken body, twisted through the spokes of the wheel, became a landmark that dominated the urban landscape and served as a permanent warning to anyone who might consider challenging royal or religious authority. Callus survived on the wheel for over 2 hours after the breaking was completed, conscious enough to respond to questions from priests who climbed ladders to reach him. His final words maintained his innocence and forgave his executioners, were recorded by witnesses and later used by Voltaire in his campaign to vindicate the condemned man's memory. The case of Robert Francois Damiens' Royal Vengeance 1757. If Jean Callus's execution demonstrated the religious dimensions of the breaking wheel, the case of Robert Francois Damiens revealed its political potential as an instrument of royal terror. Damiens, a domestic servant who had attempted to assassinate King Louis Rossi with a small penknife, faced a modified version of breaking wheel punishment that was specifically designed to demonstrate the consequences of attacking the sacred person of the king. Damiens' attack on Louis XV had been almost comically ineffective. His knife barely penetrated the king's winter clothing and caused only a minor wound. But the symbolic significance of the attack was enormous, representing a direct challenge to the divine right of kings that formed the foundation of French royal authority. The response was calculated to demonstrate that any attack on the royal person, no matter how minor, would be met with consequences that defied human comprehension. The execution was planned as a major state event, with invitations sent to foreign ambassadors and dignitaries who would witness French justice and carry reports of its severity back to their own countries. The venue was the Place de Grève in Paris, the traditional site of royal executions, where a special platform was constructed to accommodate the complex series of tortures that Damiens would endure. The executioner chosen for Damiens' case was Charles Henry Sanson, the same man who would later execute Jean Callus. However, Damiens' sentence called for tortures that went far beyond the standard breaking wheel procedure. He was to be tortured with red-hot pincers, have molten lead and boiling oil poured into his wounds, and then be drawn and quartered by horses before finally being broken on the wheel. The execution began at dawn with the application of hot pincers to Damiens' flesh, tearing away pieces of skin and muscle while molten metal was poured into the wounds. This preliminary torture was designed to weaken him physically while demonstrating the range of punishments available to royal justice. Damiens' screams echoed across Paris as thousands gathered to witness the spectacle. The attempt to draw and quarter Damiens using horses proved more difficult than expected, as his joints and muscles were stronger than anticipated. When the horses failed to dismember him cleanly, Sanson's assistants used knives to cut through tendons and joints while Damiens remained conscious and screaming. The entire process took over 4 hours, during which the condemned man remained alert and aware of everything being done to his body. Only after Damiens had been partially dismembered was he finally bound to the breaking wheel for the completion of his sentence. By this point, his body was so damaged that the traditional wheel procedure was almost anticlimactic. But Sanson completed the breaking of his remaining bones with professional precision, ensuring that every aspect of the royal sentence was fulfilled exactly as ordered. The crowd that witnessed Damiens' execution included not just Parisians but visitors from across Europe who had traveled specifically to see this demonstration of French royal power. Street vendors sold food and souvenirs while artists sketched the proceedings and writers composed accounts that would be published throughout Europe as warnings about the consequences of challenging royal authority. Technical innovation and regional variations. The breaking wheel underwent constant technical refinement throughout its centuries of use, with different regions developing specialized variations suited to their particular judicial philosophies and practical requirements. German wheels tended to be larger and more heavily constructed, reflecting the German preference for systematic thoroughness in all aspects of execution procedure. French wheels incorporated more sophisticated restraint systems that allowed executioners to adjust the victim's position during the breaking process, ensuring optimal bone alignment for each blow. These mechanical refinements demonstrated the French approach to execution as a form of applied engineering, where technical precision was as important as theatrical impact. English variations of the breaking wheel were less common, but featured unique innovations designed to accommodate English legal tradition. English wheels often included mechanisms that could be adjusted to match the specific sentence imposed by the court. Some criminals might receive only partial breaking of limbs, while others faced complete dismemberment. The tools used with breaking wheels also underwent continuous development. Ooh. The iron bars used to break bones were carefully weighted and balanced to deliver optimal force, while specialized hammers were designed for different types of fractures. Some executioners developed personal techniques that became famous throughout their regions, attracting spectators who traveled great distances to witness particular methods of wheel operation. The positioning and restraint systems used with breaking wheels represented sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and biomechanics. Executioners knew exactly how to align bones to ensure clean breaks, how to control blood flow to prevent premature death from bleeding, and how to manage the victim's position to maximize both pain and spectacle value. The economics of wheel executions, breaking wheel executions generated substantial economic activity in medieval and early modern European cities. The construction and maintenance of execution equipment required skilled craftsmen, while the operation of executions employed not just executioners but also guards, priests, administrative officials, and support personnel. Cities competed to host major wheel executions, as these events drew visitors from across their regions and generated significant revenue from lodging, food, and entertainment. Innkeepers, merchants, and vendors could expect exceptional business during execution days, while local authorities collected taxes and fees from the increased commercial activity. The wheel itself was often a major municipal investment, constructed by master carpenters and metalworkers who took pride in creating instruments that were both functional and artistically impressive. Some cities owned multiple wheels of different sizes and designs, allowing them to accommodate different types of sentences and victim characteristics. Professional executioner families like the Sansons developed substantial wealth through their monopoly on wheel executions in major cities. They charged fees not just for performing executions, but also for training apprentices, maintaining equipment, and providing consultation on execution procedures. Their specialized knowledge made them valuable assets to municipal and royal authorities who wanted to ensure that executions would proceed smoothly and provide maximum deterrent effect. Psychological and social impact. The breaking wheel served functions that extended far beyond simple punishment, operating as a complex social institution that reinforced class hierarchies, religious orthodoxy, and political authority through the systematic application of spectacular violence. The public nature of wheel executions made them communal events that brought together people of all social classes in shared witness to state power. The psychological impact of wheel executions was carefully calculated to influence not just immediate spectators, but entire communities that would hear about the proceedings through word of mouth and published accounts. The knowledge that such punishments existed and could be applied to anyone who challenged established authority created a climate of fear that influenced behavior throughout society. Different social classes experience wheel executions differently, with nobles viewing them from comfortable seating areas while commoners stood in crowded general admission areas. These physical arrangements reinforce social hierarchies while allowing people of all classes to participate in the ritual affirmation of royal justice. The religious dimensions of wheel executions were as important as their legal and political functions. Priests would attend condemned prisoners throughout their ordeal, providing spiritual counsel that framed their suffering as necessary for salvation. The execution became a religious performance that demonstrated divine justice while offering redemption to both victim and spectators. Women and children regularly attended wheel executions, reflecting the European view that witnessing such spectacles was educational and morally beneficial. Parents would bring their children to executions as lessons about the consequences of crime and disobedience, while the presence of women in the audience added emotional intensity to the proceedings. Medical and anatomical knowledge. The successful operation of breaking wheels required extensive knowledge of human anatomy and physiology that was often more advanced than the medical understanding of contemporary physicians. Executioners studied the structure of bones and joints, the location of major blood vessels, and the mechanics of fractures with scientific precision. Professional executioners often consulted with barber surgeons and physicians to improve their techniques and understanding of human anatomy. This collaboration between medical professionals and executioners contributed to advances in anatomical knowledge, while ensuring that executions would be carried out with maximum effectiveness. The systematic documentation of wheel executions provided valuable data about human physical limits and responses to trauma. These records, maintained by courts and executioner families, became unofficial medical texts that influenced understanding of injury, pain, and death throughout European medical communities. Different types of fractures were recognized and categorized by experienced executioners, who understood how various bone breaks would affect the victim's survival time and consciousness. Persian guards were stationed nearby to ensure that Mithridates received his daily feeding of milk and honey, maintaining the delicate balance that kept him alive while accelerating his consumption by insects and decay. The guards wore face coverings to protect themselves from the overwhelming stench that surrounded the boats, but they continued their duties with professional dedication that demonstrated the systematic nature of Persian justice. By the end of the first week, maggots had hatched from eggs laid in Mithridates' wounds and orifices, beginning to consume his flesh from the inside while he remained conscious. His exposed hands and feet had swollen to grotesque proportions from insect bites and bacterial infection, while his face had become nearly unrecognizable due to the constant attention of flies and wasps. The feeding continued throughout his ordeal, ensuring that Mithridates remained alive and conscious to experience every stage of his gradual consumption. Persian executioners understood the precise balance of nutrients and toxins necessary to maintain life, while facilitating decay, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of human physiology that was applied to the systematic prolongation of suffering. Witnesses described how Mithridates continued to respond to questions and stimuli well into the second week of his ordeal, though his voice had become weak and his words often unintelligible. His eyes remained alert and aware, following the movements of guards and visitors who came to observe his condition. The psychological horror of remaining conscious while watching his own body being consumed alive was considered an essential part of the punishment. On the 17th day, Mithridates finally succumbed to a combination of septic shock, organ failure, and the massive bacterial infection that had consumed most of his body. His death was noted by Persian officials not as a mercy, but as the completion of cosmic justice, the final stage in a process that had restored universal balance through systematic suffering. The case of Artaxerxes the Younger, royal family execution, 395 BC. Perhaps no scaphism execution better demonstrates the political dimensions of this punishment than the case of Artaxerxes the Younger, a Persian prince who was convicted of plotting against his brother, King Artaxerxes II. His execution represented not just family justice, but a demonstration of royal power that would influence Persian politics for generations. The prince's case was particularly sensitive because his rebellion had attracted support from Greek mercenaries and other foreign elements who threatened Persian independence. His execution needed to demonstrate not just royal justice but Persian superiority over foreign influence, making Scaphism the perfect choice for its combination of sophisticated cruelty and cultural symbolism. The boats constructed for Artaxerxes' execution were works of art in themselves, carved from rare cedar wood and decorated with inlays of precious metals that transformed the execution instruments into objects of beauty. The contrast between the artistic refinement of the boats and their horrific purpose was deliberate, demonstrating Persian ability to combine aesthetic sophistication with absolute ruthlessness. The execution took place during the Persian New Year celebrations, when the contrast between the joy of the festival and the horror of Scaphism would have maximum psychological impact on observers. The timing was carefully chosen to demonstrate that royal justice transcended seasonal celebrations and family bonds. Artaxerxes' execution was conducted in the presence of foreign ambassadors and captured Greek mercenaries, who were forced to watch their former allies' fate. The message was clear. Anyone who challenged Persian authority, regardless of their social status or foreign connections, would face consequences that defied human comprehension. The prince survived in the boats for 19 days. Slightly longer than the soldier Mithridates, possibly due to his better initial physical condition and the higher quality of the boats used for his execution. His prolonged suffering became a matter of state interest, with daily reports sent to the king describing his condition and the progress of his decay. The psychological dimension of Artaxerxes' execution was enhanced by forcing him to listen to reports of how his rebellion was being systematically crushed and his supporters executed. The condemned prince was made to understand not just his own approaching death, but the complete failure of his political ambitions and the suffering his actions had brought to others. The science of systematic decay, what made Scaphism uniquely horrifying was the scientific precision with which Persian executioners managed the decay process. This wasn't random torture, but carefully controlled biological warfare that used the victim's own body as both weapon and target. Persian understanding of human physiology, insect behavior, and bacterial processes was applied to create a form of execution that maximized both suffering and symbolic impact. The boats themselves were designed according to principles that Persian engineers had developed through generations of experience. The wood was treated with substances that would resist decay while allowing for proper drainage of bodily fluids. Ventilation holes were positioned to maintain air circulation without allowing the victim to escape or significantly improve their condition. The internal dimensions of the boats were calculated to prevent the victim from moving enough to injure themselves fatally, while ensuring that they remained in contact with their own waste products. This positioning was crucial to the effectiveness of Scaphism, as the constant exposure to human waste created the bacterial environment necessary for the systematic infection and decay of living tissue. Persian executioners understood the life cycle of various insects and parasites that would colonize the victim's body, timing the execution to coincide with optimal breeding seasons for flies, wasps, and other scavengers. They also understood how different environmental conditions would affect the rate of decay and insect activity, choosing execution sites that would provide ideal conditions for prolonged suffering. The feeding regimen used in Scaphism was based on sophisticated understanding of human nutrition and digestion. The milk and honey mixture provided just enough sustenance to maintain life while creating digestive problems that would enhance the victim's suffering. The quantities and timing of feedings were carefully calculated to achieve maximum effect. Different types of honey were used for different effects. Some varieties attracted specific types of insects, while others had medicinal properties that could prolong the victim's survival. Persian beekeepers developed specialized honeys, specifically for use in Scaphism executions, demonstrating the extent to which entire industries supported the execution system. The bacterial processes that consumed the victim's body were also understood and managed by Persian executioners. They knew which types of infections would develop at different stages of the process and how these infections would affect the victim's consciousness and survival time. This knowledge allowed them to predict and control the progression of the execution with remarkable precision. Cultural and religious significance, scaphism wasn't simply an execution method, but a complex religious ritual that embodied Persian beliefs about justice, purification, and cosmic order. The systematic destruction of the victim's body was seen as necessary to restore the universal balance that their crimes had disrupted, while the prolonged nature of their suffering demonstrated the thoroughness of Persian justice. Zoroastrian religious principles influenced every aspect of scaphism execution, from the blessing of the boats to the disposal of the victim's remains. The execution was viewed as a battle between the forces of light and darkness, with the victim's suffering serving to purify the cosmic corruption they had introduced through their crimes. The boats themselves held symbolic significance beyond their practical function as execution instruments. In Persian mythology, boats were associated with journeys between different states of existence, and the victim's time in the boats was seen as a voyage through the underworld that would prepare their soul for final judgment. Persian priests attended scaphism executions to ensure that proper religious protocols were followed and to interpret the victim's suffering for observers. The execution became a form of public theology that reinforced religious orthodoxy while demonstrating the consequences of challenging cosmic order. The gradual consumption of the victim's body by insects and decay was interpreted as evidence of divine justice, with different stages of decomposition corresponding to different aspects of spiritual purification. Persian religious authorities developed elaborate interpretive frameworks that explained how each day of suffering contributed to the restoration of cosmic balance. Economic and social impact. Scaphism executions generated substantial economic activity within the Persian Empire, involving specialized craftsmen who built the boats, suppliers who provided the milk and honey, and guards who monitored the execution sites. The complexity of scaphism execution required coordination between multiple government departments and professional guilds. The boats used for scaphism were major investments that demonstrated the Persian commitment to systematic justice. Master woodworkers competed for contracts to build execution boats, developing innovations that improved both the effectiveness and artistic quality of these instruments. Some boats became famous throughout the empire for their craftsmanship and the memorable executions they facilitated. Professional executioner families developed substantial wealth through their monopoly on scaphism procedures in different regions of the empire. Their specialized knowledge made them valuable assets to provincial governors who wanted to ensure that executions would achieve maximum deterrent effect while properly fulfilling religious requirements. The social impact of scaphism extended far beyond its immediate victims to influence Persian culture and politics for centuries. The knowledge that such punishments existed and could be applied to anyone who challenged authority created a climate of fear that helped maintain political stability while reinforcing social hierarchies. Regional variations and technical innovations. Different regions of the Persian Empire developed their own variations of scaphism that reflected local environmental conditions and cultural preferences. Coastal regions used boats made from different types of wood that could better withstand humid conditions, while desert areas incorporated methods for managing water supplies and insect populations. Some provincial governors commissioned boats with additional features designed to enhance the victim's suffering or improve the spectacle for observers. These innovations included viewing windows that allowed spectators to see the decay process, drainage systems that could be controlled to manage odors, and mechanical devices that could adjust the victim's position during the execution. Persian engineers developed specialized tools and techniques for managing scaphism executions, including instruments for measuring the victim's vital signs, formulations for enhancing insect attraction, and methods for documenting the progress of decay. These technical innovations were shared throughout the empire through training programs and professional publications. The Persian military adapted scaphism techniques for use in field conditions, developing portable boats that could be transported with army units and used to execute captured enemies or deserters. These military applications demonstrated the versatility of scaphism as both a judicial punishment and a tool of psychological warfare. Legacy and modern parallels. The practice of scaphism was eventually abandoned as the Persian Empire declined and was conquered by Alexander the Great and subsequent rulers who found such executions politically inconvenient. However, the psychological and technical principles underlying scaphism continue to influence torture methods throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. Modern human rights organizations have documented torture techniques that employ similar principles to scaphism. The systematic use of biological processes to enhance suffering, the careful management of victim survival to prolong torture, and the psychological impact of forcing prisoners to participate in their own degradation. The Persian understanding of execution as a form of theater designed to influence observers as much as punish victims has parallels in modern interrogation techniques that use humiliation and degradation as tools for breaking resistance. The sophistication of scaphism execution, with its careful attention to timing, environment, and psychological impact, demonstrates principles that continue to influence coercive methods today. Contemporary medical and psychological research has confirmed many of the principles that Persian executioners understood intuitively. The relationship between physical suffering and mental breakdown, the importance of environmental factors in maintaining consciousness during torture, and the effectiveness of forcing victims to witness their own degradation. The choreography of treasons end in medieval and early modern England. No execution method combined ritual humiliation, surgical precision, and political theater quite like drawing and quartering. This wasn't simply a way to kill traitors. It was an elaborate ceremony that could last for hours, during which the condemned was systematically dismantled in front of crowds, while their suffering was transformed into a lesson about the price of opposing royal authority. The full sentence for high treason against the English crown was precisely worded. The condemned would be drawn on a hurdle to the place of execution, there to be hanged by the neck, but not until dead, then disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, and the body divided into 4 parts. Each element of this sentence served specific legal, political, and symbolic purposes that reflected centuries of English legal tradition and royal prerogative. Drawing and quartering represented the English understanding of treason not merely as a crime against the state, but as a violation of the sacred bond between subject and sovereign that demanded the most complete form of punishment imaginable. The method was specifically designed to destroy not just the traitor's life, but their body, dignity, and posthumous reputation in a single unforgettable performance. The case of William Wallace, Scottish national hero, 1305, perhaps no drawing and quartering execution is better known than that of William Wallace, the Scottish knight who led resistance against English rule and was captured after years of guerrilla warfare. Wallace's execution was designed not just to end his life, but to destroy the symbol of Scottish independence he had become, demonstrating English power to both Scottish rebels and potential foreign supporters. Wallace was captured in 1305 after being betrayed by Scottish nobles who had made peace with King Edward. His trial in Westminster Hall was a carefully orchestrated political performance designed to legitimize his execution while demonstrating English legal superiority over Scottish customs. The charges against him included treason, murder, and sacrilege, crimes that justified the most severe punishment available under English law. On August 23, 1305, Wallace was brought from his cell in the Tower of London and bound to a hurdle, a wooden sledge designed specifically for drawing condemned traitors through the streets. The hurdle was deliberately uncomfortable, forcing the victim to endure a painful journey while being pelted with refuse and abuse from crowds that lined the route from the tower to the execution ground at Smithfield. The drawing of Wallace through London streets took nearly 3 hours, during which thousands of citizens gathered to witness what they saw as justice for Scottish raids on English territory. The slow pace of the procession allowed maximum exposure of the condemned man to public humiliation while building anticipation for the main event that would follow at Smithfield. The execution ground at Smithfield was a permanent installation designed specifically for drawing and quartering ceremonies. A raised platform ensured that thousands of spectators could witness the proceedings clearly, while specialized equipment and drainage systems accommodated the complex requirements of dismemberment and disembowelment procedures. The executioner assigned to Wallace's case was Master William, a professional who had inherited his position from his father and grandfather. The executioner families of medieval England were skilled craftsmen who understood both the technical requirements of drawing and quartering and its symbolic significance as a demonstration of royal justice. Wallace's execution began with partial hanging, enough to weaken him and provide additional humiliation, but not sufficient to cause death. The rope was positioned to compress his throat and restrict breathing while allowing him to remain conscious for the dismemberment that would follow. English law required that traitors remain alive and aware during their disembowelment, making the timing of the hanging crucial to the success of the execution. After being cut down from the gallows while still alive, Wallace was laid on a table where Master William began the disembowelment procedure. This wasn't crude butchery, but precise surgical work that required extensive anatomical knowledge. The executioner made careful incisions in Wallace's abdomen, then slowly extracted his intestines while keeping him conscious and aware of what was happening to his body. You'll discover why Chinese emperors required their executioners to train for 20 years before they were allowed to perform the death of 1,000 cuts, a torture so precise that skilled practitioners could keep victims conscious and screaming for 3 full days while removing their flesh, piece by piece. You'll learn about the breaking wheels of medieval Europe, massive wooden devices that could systematically shatter every bone in the human body while keeping victims alive to experience each individual fracture. These weren't crude instruments of vengeance, but precision-engineered machines operated by craftsmen who took pride in their ability to prolong suffering for exactly the right amount of time. I'll reveal the economic systems that grew up around royal executions, entire industries dedicated to manufacturing torture devices, training executioners, and managing the crowds that flocked to witness spectacular deaths. Did you know that in medieval Paris, execution days generated more revenue than religious festivals? That skilled executioners earned more than court physicians and commanded respect equal to master craftsmen? You'll discover the architectural marvels hidden beneath royal palaces, torture chambers carved from solid stone, equipped with drainage systems for blood, ventilation shafts to carry screams away from royal apartments, and acoustic designs that could amplify or muffle sounds depending on whether the king wanted to hear his enemies suffer. But here's what will shock you most. These methods didn't disappear with the fall of ancient kingdoms. The psychological techniques perfected by royal torturers, the systematic breaking of human will, the precise application of pain to extract information, the use of anticipation and uncertainty as weapons. These methods evolved and adapted, influencing interrogation techniques that are still used today in places where international law cannot reach. And if you stay with me until the very end of this dark journey, I'll reveal which of these royal execution methods was so effective, so perfectly designed to break the human spirit, that certain governments still use modified versions in hidden facilities around the world. Techniques that trace their lineage directly back to the torture chambers of ancient kings and queens. Before we descend into this abyss of royal cruelty, if you find these deep explorations of history's darkest secrets both educational and disturbing, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Only 18% of you watching are actually subscribed, and your support helps me bring you content that uncovers truths most people will never hear. Now, settle back, let your breathing slow, and prepare yourself for a journey that will forever change how you understand power, justice, and the price of crossing those who wear crowns. Close your eyes and let me transport you to a world where human suffering was elevated to an art form, where the screams of the dying provided entertainment for the most cultured societies in human history. Our first stop takes us to the Forbidden City in Beijing, where behind walls designed to keep secrets, Chinese emperors perfected what they called the gentle death, a punishment so refined in its cruelty that it could stretch the dying process across multiple sunrises while extracting every possible moment of consciousness from the failing human body. To understand the true horror of royal executions, we must first explore the physical spaces where they occurred. These weren't crude dungeons or simple execution grounds, but sophisticated architectural complexes designed by master builders who understood both engineering and psychology. Deep beneath the palaces of ancient kings lay networks of chambers that represented the pinnacle of torture technology. These underground complexes were marvels of engineering that could control temperature, lighting, acoustics, and even airflow to maximize the suffering of victims while protecting the sensibilities of royal audiences. Consider the execution chambers discovered beneath the ruins of Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Persian Empire. Archaeologists have uncovered a complex of interconnected rooms carved directly from bedrock, each designed for specific types of torture and execution. The main chamber features a domed ceiling with precise acoustic properties. Whispers from the center of the room can be heard clearly throughout the space, while screams are amplified and focused toward a raised platform where Persian nobles would sit to observe proceedings. The chamber floors slope gently towards central drains carved with intricate Persian motifs, allowing blood and other fluids to flow away while maintaining the artistic beauty of the space. Bronze braziers positioned around the room could heat the air to unbearable temperatures or be extinguished to create bone-chilling cold, giving executioners another tool to torment their victims. Water channels built into the walls could flood selected areas of the chamber, allowing for specialized drowning tortures or creating reflecting pools that forced victims to watch their own suffering in the rippling water. The Persian engineers who designed these chambers understood that psychological torture could be as effective as physical pain. European royal torture chambers evolved different architectural solutions suited to their climate and culture. The dungeons beneath the Tower of London represent the English approach to systematic torture, a series of chambers connected by narrow corridors that create a sense of endless maze-like horror for prisoners being led to their fate. The most infamous of these chambers, known as the White Tower's basement, features walls lined with iron rings and chains capable of securing victims in dozens of different positions. The stone walls are covered with centuries of scratches, carvings, and stains that tell the story of thousands of people who died in unimaginable agony. English royal architects developed innovative methods for controlling the experience of both victims and observers. Hidden galleries allowed kings and nobles to watch executions without being seen, maintaining the psychological distance necessary for them to enjoy the spectacle without confronting their own complicity. The Chinese imperial torture complexes beneath the Forbidden City represent perhaps the most sophisticated approach to architectural cruelty ever devised. These chambers were designed according to feng shui principles, but perverted to create spaces that would drain the life force from victims while amplifying their suffering. The main execution hall features a raised platform surrounded by terrace seating for court officials, with the emperor's viewing box positioned to provide the optimal view of proceedings. The platform itself incorporates drainage systems so sophisticated that they could channel different types of fluids, blood, water, oil, to different collection points, allowing executioners to manage multiple torture methods simultaneously. Lighting systems using mirrors and oil lamps could focus intense heat and light on specific areas of the platform, creating spotlight effects that enhance the theatrical nature of executions while providing additional tools for torture. The Chinese understood that controlling what people could see was as important as controlling what they experienced physically. The ventilation systems in these chambers deserve special attention as they represent some of the most advanced engineering of the ancient world. Chinese architects developed methods for controlling airflow that could concentrate smoke, incense, or other airborne substances in specific areas of the chamber. This allowed them to suffocate victims gradually, expose them to mind-altering drugs, or simply enhance the sensory experience for observers. Some chambers featured false walls and hidden passages that allowed executioners to appear and disappear